Did you know that the biggest leak most poker regs have isn't necessarily their poker technique, but rather their performance? Today, we're going to talk about the mental game of poker. This is one that I've been excited to talk about because I believe that the mental game of poker is largely underrated. I think that after today's lecture, you'll see that this is a skill that should be developed just as much as your poker technique. As we all know, poker is a game of small edges and big swings, and every hand can be considered an investment into your edge. But the tidal waves of variance and those huge swings can easily overwhelm even the most seasoned players. Why is studying the mental game important? Well, let me demonstrate this to you using an example. Let's imagine that we have, an A game, a B game, a C game. You can categorize it however you like, but I'm just going to use ABC for this example. And we'll say that when you're playing your A game, you're zoned in, you're doing really well. You're locked into the action. You can feel the flow. You're in the zone. And here you're winning 6 big blinds per 100. Your B game, solid, but kind of autopilot, little button clicky. You're still doing well, 3 big blinds per 100. And then we'll have your C game. And this is somewhat tilted or suboptimal, -2. Now, I think I'm being quite generous at -2. And I think when a lot of people are tilted, their tilted game might be more like -20, right? It might just be huge blunders. So this is fairly generous. But let's just use these numbers for an example. So scenario 1, you play your A game 10% of the time. That's when you're really locked in. Most of the time you're playing your B game, and say 30% of the time you're playing a C game. You're not on monkey tilt, but you're not really focused either, right? If we add up your EV here, you're winning 1,800 big blinds over the course of 100,000 hands, 1.8 big blinds per 100. Now let's look at scenario 2. It's very similar, except it's 30% A game, 10% C game, right? So you're taking 20% of that time that you're kind of playing suboptimally and moving it into the zone. It's a pretty small shift, but even that is enough to almost double your win rate, right? You go from 1,800 to 3,400. And you can plug in different numbers and play around with this. I think I've been pretty generous so far with the A, B, and C win rates. No matter how you slice it, moving your performance away from your worst game and towards your best game can have dramatic effects on your win rate. You need to be putting in more volume at a higher level of performance. And I don't think this is something most of us capitalize on. I think a lot of people are just so focused on volume that they forget about the quality of that volume. In this presentation, we're going to cover mental wellness. We're going to talk about the 7 types of tilt, how to recognize that tilt, and how to correct it. And finally, we'll talk about weaponizing your mental game. So let's start with the foundations. First, I'm going to talk about mental health, setting yourself up for better things down the road. Now, why is it so easy to neglect your mental health? Mental health is tricky. Developing emotional intelligence and being cognizant of your own feelings is as much a skill as developing poker technique in and of itself. The problem is that it requires more introspection, and it requires addressing issues that we often subconsciously or even directly choose to ignore. This is why I think mental health is such a difficult aspect to address, because unlike poker skill, where we have solvers and we have coaches and we have trackers to measure the performance, mental health is much harder to measure, to track, and to review. Mental health can range from I'm not putting in very good performance to crippling anxiety, depression, or worse. So I think it's important that you set yourself up for a good foundation in order to maximize your performance. And before we go any further, may I just say, I am not some guru. I am not a mental health expert. I'm not a psychologist. I am not a performance coach, and I've never claimed to be one. I'm just a poker player that's read a few books and has dealt with some of the same struggles that I'm sure all of you have. I've struggled with my fair share of mental health, as I'm sure many of you have as well. Keep this in mind and take what I say with a grain of salt. But what I am good at is reading and digesting information. And I think I'm pretty good at relaying that information in a way that other people can understand clearly. So again, not a guru. Okay, guys? All right, let's start with the emotional spectrum. Peak performance is a function of your stress level or the cortisol levels in your brain per se. But how much stress is ideal when playing poker? Now I'm going to launch a poll here. Most of you voted mild stress. And indeed, that is the correct answer. And this stems from something called Yerkes-Dodson Law. So the Yerkes-Dodson Law is an old school psychological theory that proposes that there is an optimal level of stress somewhere between, just an apathetic zombie and a nervous wreck. And the way they did this is they measured performance against cortisol levels in animals and humans, and they found that depending on the complexity of the task, there was an optimal level between how stressed you were and the performance quality. If your stress is too low, you're apathetic. You don't care enough to improve or strive for better. It's just permanent autopilot. And again, if your stress is very high, you're way more susceptible to tilt, poor emotional control. You're unable to separate the process from the outcome. I think a lot of players, after experiencing too much stress, what they'll do is they'll overcompensate. And for example, they'll try to counter it by removing emotion entirely. This approach is not optimal, right? If you're in a zombie-like state, you have this emotional disconnection that just makes it impossible to improve or motivate yourself, and ultimately will decrease the quality of your play. On the flip side of that, many players are far too invested into their results, which creates tilt and prevents them from separating the process from the outcome. And of course, placing too much emotion on the results of a poker hand is just bound to end poorly because poker is so swingy. Emotional excess is going to impede logical thought and decrease the quality of your play. Now, like I said, the optimal level of stress depends on the complexity of the task. More complex tasks like poker require less stress. Whereas less complex tasks, you can often do better with a little bit higher stress, but it's very much in a middle ground. So how do we get into the zone? And first of all, what is the zone? Is it even a real thing? Well, many performance specialists state that the zone is something of a state of flow whereby a person is fully immersed in what they're doing. Now, while not everyone agrees on what the zone is, there are among athletes and competitive sportsmen a collection of common terms that most of them will use. So in the zone, you are totally engrossed in the flow of the action. You don't experience any outside thoughts or distractions. You just feel focused purely on execution, not results. Many say they feel an altered sense of time, and any thoughts of past and future are purely strategic. So the zone is, to me, a state of immense focus. Now, I come from a chess background, and I used to play a little bit of competitive chess. In competitive chess, you can play in a tournament setting for 6 hours straight and over the board game. 6 hours straight. That's how long the time controls run. And in that time, it feels like it goes by in an instant because you just get so totally engrossed in the action, even a simple board game, that everything else whizzes by. You're not focused on anything. You're just in the zone. Now, how do we get in the zone in poker? There's a few things. So first of all, as mentioned before, you need the optimal level of stress. So you need to care enough about your results, but also the degree of challenge. So playing as an underdog in a very challenging game can cause anxiety. And conversely, a very high-skilled player playing in a low-skilled game will often feel boredom, lack of interest. The psychology of optimal experience states that this zone, this flow state area, happens when our skill level is met by the challenge. Poker is a fairly challenging game, but I feel like a lot of us, we're going to be on autopilot. We're not really that interested. Sometimes if the game is slow or if we just feel we're totally ahead of our opponents, it's important that the degree of challenge is met. It's important that you're always trying to get the most out of your game. Before I go on, I'm going to talk a little bit about a vicious cycle that I think many of us may relate to. In order to get in the zone, you need the optimal level of stress. You need to be interested and challenged enough relative to your skill level in order to do well. And lastly, you need your physical health in check. So accumulated stresses from work, relationships, results, and just life in general all contribute to emotional fatigue. And these stressors can build up over time. But This creates something that I might call the vicious cycle. So you get crappy results, you break your routine, you start neglecting your diet, your sleep, you start playing poorly more often. That affects your results. You get crappy results more often, and it just spirals like that, right? So oftentimes, to deal with accumulated stressors in life, we'll adapt poor habits as crutches. This can lead to neglecting your sleep, your routine, nutrition, health, which only reinforces your long-term stress. And this vicious cycle is especially common among poker players. The most dangerous part of this cycle is that you can become just completely trapped in a state of perpetual fatigue. When you feel like crap for long enough, you will forget what being well is supposed to feel like. Trust me, I know. You'll become accustomed to always feeling tired and worn out. You will get trapped in your C game forever without even realizing it, in this vicious cycle where no matter how much you sleep, you're always tired. Whenever you eat, you just feel like crap. You're just always lethargic and apathetic. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever experienced this, but I know I have. And it's a very hard cycle to break, 100%, hey? I'm sure we can all relate to this on some level. It is very important to break out of that cycle, because all the performance training and fancy words in the world won't help if you're not taking care of your most basic needs, Maslow's hierarchy, right? You need to get your sleep in check. You need to just, I'm not saying wake up at 5 a.m. and go eat a salad every day. I'm just saying, try and sleep on a regular schedule. Try and eat something other than pizza every day, right? So I think one of the most important things you can do to break out of that cycle, I think the first and most important step is just establishing a daily routine. And poker players suck at daily routines because we all have terrible sleep schedules. Let's just face it. Now, routine can be as simple as your morning ritual. This is what I do when I wake up. This is roughly when I wake up. Work, eat, sleep, go to bed. It doesn't have to be timed out perfectly. It's just your little ritual. Here's what I do when I wake up. Here's what I do before I go to sleep. Sticking to a routine will improve your sleep, eating habits. It improves your stress, your time, your effectiveness. Many studies have shown that a daily routine is strongly correlated with better mental and physical health. There's many things you can do. You can exercise more often, stay hydrated, eat healthy food. Meditation has been shown to help avoid known stressors. Well, we can't do that as much playing poker, but you know what I mean. So don't overlook the physical aspect of the mental game. Mental health stems from physical health. And you don't have to be, some gym jockey. It's something as simple as just getting your sleep cycle in check, just eating a regular scheduled breakfast, just not letting this spiral out of control is required for everything else, right? Next, I want to talk about building a poker training routine. So in addition to maintaining reasonably healthy lifestyle, you should also try and build your poker training routine. I'm going to talk about what a solid routine involves. So first of all, when you're practicing poker, you want an intentional, deliberate session rather than just button clicking. You want to set smart goals for yourself, and you want to create a checklist of activities to complete. Most importantly, you need to be dedicated to training over the long term. Like any skill, it requires dedicated, deliberate practice over time. Even small amounts over a long time will do wonders for your game. This is an example training routine, and the truth is, you can create your own. This is something you can try. After you're done playing, you can upload your most recent hand histories to GTO Wizard, and then review yesterday's or your previous session's hand histories that same day. Now, that way, you've uploaded a set of hands, and you're reviewing last session's hands, and that gives the thing time to process. That way, you always have hands to review. I recommend sorting the table by your biggest EV loss to find your blunders. Next, mark a few of the most interesting hands with a star and use those hands as inspiration for new spots to study tomorrow. Try the daily dose of GTO and try and think of the answer before looking at it, of course. Next, you can use the GTO trainer. I like the pre-flop to river drill for general training, but you can also try a more specific scenario. Maybe you want to practice 3-bet pots or, in position C betting, whatever you like. You can set a session for 50, 100 hands and just try and grind that out and do as best as you can. Study one new spot in the solution browser for 10, 20 minutes. And I don't mean just stare at the chart for 10, 20 minutes. You can look at interesting spots from your hand history review, Personally, I like to study similar textures and try and extrapolate patterns between those textures. So for example, maybe button versus big blind, single raise pot monotone. Then I'll look at a bunch of monotone boards to see roughly how it plays out from flop to river, look at reports. I could make an entire coaching video on, just trading routines and how to study and such, but I won't spend that much time on it because this video is more about the mental game. Aggregate reports, I love the aggregate reports. If you have GTO Wizard Premium, these are great. You can group flops together, filter them, browse turn reports. You can also try the range builder, just constructing one spots to help you think and visualize your strategy. And as an extra step, of course, you can join the weekly coaching or watch one of the previous videos. Okay, so let's talk about SMART goals. Many people, the first time they hear this, something will click. I know it did for me. So a SMART goal is a goal that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. A SMART goal, so first of all, specific. What exactly are you trying to achieve? Measurable. How will you know when you've achieved it? Is it genuinely possible to achieve it? Is it attainable? How does it contribute to your, this says your agency's revenue growth, but does it contribute to your growth as a person or as a poker player? And time bound. So when does it get achieved? Let me give you guys some examples of SMART goals versus dumb goals. So a SMART goal, I will practice 4-bet pots in position for 2 hours every week until I can regularly achieve a GTO Wizard score of 95% in the trainer. So note that it's very specific, it's time bound, it's measurable, right? And it's achievable. It's only 2 hours a week. Now let's compare that to a dumb goal. I will memorize the strategy for every 4-bet pot in every spot. I don't care how long it takes. This one is not measurable. It's not time bound, and it's not achievable, right? Let's try another one. I'll review my play every Friday for 30 minutes to an hour using the hand history analyzer. I'll look at any spot with an EV loss greater than X. Call it -1, -2, whatever you like. Now this is achievable, it's time-bound, it's specific, and it's measurable because once you've reviewed your play, you know you've done it. Now, a dumb goal. I review my play sometimes when I get cooler to make sure it wasn't my fault. It's not time-bound, it's not super specific, and again, the goal isn't really correct. This is just satiating your ego, not really trying to improve, right? A lot of people just use Wizard to look up spots where they got cooler and say, yeah, see, I played it well. No, that's not the point, guys. All right. I will play 20K hands this month. I plan to play on XYZ days, and I've divided my time equally between those days to create achievable volume goals. Again, it's specific, it's time-bound, it's achievable, it's measurable. You have set it out, you've divided up your time, you've created a reasonable volume goal. Now let's compare this to, I've set a challenge to play 100,000 hands. I will Nananoku style multi-table until my eyes bleed. Again, it's not specific in that you haven't really divvied this up. There's no time bound, so it just feels like it goes forever. And, it's not super attainable in a short period of time. I'm not saying it's not possible, but this is a much better goal than this, right? Whenever you're trying to set a poker goal for yourself, try and ensure that it is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. That's how you achieve things. Small, achievable steps are much better than pie-in-the-sky, vapid, immeasurable dumb goals, right? Next, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the 4 stages of competence. So this is a common theory about how people learn. What is the 4 stages of competence? Well, the theory states that we start at unconscious incompetence, and this is a spot where you are unaware of the skill and you don't even realize your own lack of proficiency. You don't know what you don't know. And next, as you learn a little bit more, you start to recognize your own lack of competence. You're aware that there is a valley of skill you're missing. You don't have that, but you're aware it exists. Then you start climbing that valley and you realize that you're able to use the skill, but only with great effort. And as you improve further, the skill becomes automatic. And I think it's like this when you're learning everything, not just poker, but even more specific, maybe 4-bet pots in position, maybe getting into the zone. You can apply this to many different things. And everyone here is going to be a somewhat competent poker player. But I think newer players especially don't realize the vast valley of knowledge that exists, right? Dunning-Kruger effect. So this kind of relates to Dunning-Kruger, which is a very famous study. So the Dunning-Kruger effect states that the least skilled players tend to overestimate their ability relative to the population. That's not to say that they think they're great. They just don't realize how much they lack, right? And the most skilled players tend to underestimate their ability relative to the population. And this is true in everything from logic to humor levels to poker skills to and most skill-based things, right? I think that strongly relates to the 4 stages of incompetence, where when you're brand new to a skill, you don't even know what you don't know, right? You're completely unaware of what you're lacking, this great valley between where you are. And only as you climb up do you realize what you're missing. And so the moral of this story is you don't know what you don't know until you start to realize that you can't really improve. So if you're a newer player looking at this, realize there might be a lot more to poker than you've ever thought. Even if you've been playing for years, I'm sure that there's many live players out there. Many players have been playing the same strategy for 10, 15 years that haven't really started to get into the GTO side of things. And that's a whole new skill in and of itself, right? That's all for chapter 1. Let's dig right into the next chapter, the 7 types of tilt. I've taken this directly from The Mental Game of Poker by Jared Tendler. This is his original book. And in that book, he outlines 7 types of tilt. And he says that these categories of tilt make the majority of different situations that happen, and each of them has their own reasons that can be addressed. So the trick to dealing with tilt is to first recognize what is causing what type of tilt it is. And then once you can identify that, you can address the underlying factors. Now, I've added a few more after this that I think should be in there, but I'm going to start with his 7 categories first, right? So we've got run bad tilt. A streak of bad variance doesn't cause you to tilt. We all run bad, right? It just reveals the underlying reasons you tilt. And we've got injustice tilt. So injustice tilt means you're angry at the sites, the cards, the poker gods, the dealer for giving you such a bad run of cards. And then there's the hate losing tilt. So hate losing tilt is someone who hates losing more than they like winning. And this is more common than you might think. Then there's mistake tilt, which is you're not angry at the cards or anyone else. You just kind of angry at yourself for your own mistakes. Then, of course, there's entitlement tilt. So this is when you believe that your skills or your cards or your range entitles you to the pot. Revenge tilt is when you're angry at another player and you go out of your way to target them with risky plays. Lastly, there is desperation tilt. So desperation tilt is the most severe and fatal form of tilt that can lead to bankroll death, gambling addiction, buying in for your entire bankroll, chasing huge losses. This is one that we need to absolutely avoid. So let's talk about run bad tilt. Now, like I said, every human poker player will experience bad runs. This is bound to happen. It's a natural part of the game, but that's not what causes tilt. The tilt that comes from running badly is a form of accumulated tilt that develops over time. Like I said, a streak of bad variance doesn't cause tilt. It reveals the underlying reasons that you tilt. So Tendler's theory is that we need to identify those underlying reasons in order to address run bad tilt. And he says that run bad tilt can sometimes be a blessing in disguise because it reveals the underlying reasons. He says that run bad tilt is actually made up of these types of things. Now, it can be, for example, injustice tilt. This isn't fair. I'm due to run normal. I never win a flip. That's injustice tilt. You're angry at the poker gods. Or how is it possible to lose like this again? You just hate losing. It's not necessarily the variance. You just hate losing. Or, oh, I knew I shouldn't have called. How can I play so bad? That's mistake tilt, right? Or I'm too good of a player for this to happen. How can I keep losing to this freaking donkey? It's entitlement tilt. You're entitled to win because, you're just too good to lose. I'm going to 3-bet shove this idiot. Who does he think he is? That's revenge tilt. You're just going out of your way to target this guy. I'll stay here for a week if I have to win. That's desperation tilt. You're chasing losses. So let's talk about each of these and how to address all of these types of tilts, right? Talk about injustice tilt. Again, injustice tilt differs from other types of tilt in that you believe you have been wrong. Your luck is worse than mathematically possible. Some players will say, the site is rigged, the dealer is rigged, the deck is rigged, everything's rigged against me. Or even if they don't say that, they'll just hit you with excessive bad beat stories. No one wants to hear excessive bad beat stories, right? And justice tilt is tricky to deal with, but what does it stem from? Firstly, injustice tilt stems from just being bad at conceptualizing variance. Now, remember that humans have selective memory. We have bias. So what every human will do, pro or amateur, is you're going to filter out good variance and you're going to focus on bad variance. When I win, it's skill. When I lose, it's bad luck. You don't track your results properly. This is common, right? You need to get a HUD. You need to track your sessions. And also, you don't recognize that perhaps you're just being consistently outplayed. This is also a form of a justice tilt. You feel you're getting unlucky, but perhaps you're just not playing well. Now, you need to identify the strengths and weaknesses in your game, evaluate sessions regularly, learn to recognize good and bad variance. And I honestly think that just learning how to use a poker variance calculator is the most effective way to address injustice tilt. You need to be able to understand and expect the swings. I think a lot of players that come from a live background, when they first play live, they'll often think that the game is rigged or that live is, just way, way swingier than it should be, or that, online is too swingy. And what this stems from is, for example, a live player doesn't put in a whole lot of volume in a year, whereas online you're putting in triple, quadruple, way, way, way more volume. And so the swings are reflected in that. And so if you're not used to a lot of volume, if you're used to like a low volume format of poker, you might not be very good at conceptualizing the variance that comes along with that. So again, conceptualizing variance, knowing how swingy this game can be is a powerful tool to address injustice tilt and to know what type of swings can be expected. All right, so let's talk about hate losing tilt. Now, hate losing tilt is a form of tilt found in highly competitive people who simply hate losing. This type of player hates losing more than they enjoy winning. This is not something that's for me particularly, but I know a lot of players that just absolutely hate losing more than they like winning. If losing even one small pot in an otherwise good session ruins your session, or having one losing session in an otherwise winning month sends you over the edge, you may have hate losing tilt. So how do we address it? The root cause of this tilt is from overcompetitiveness and placing too much of your self-worth on your results. Remember, money lost at the table can be considered an investment into your edge. And this is something out of Tendler's book. So if you lost making a profitable play, then remember that your losses are temporary so long as you keep playing well and investing into your edge, right? And so one of the things that may cause hate losing tilt is that you just hate losing money. But remember that, again, it's an investment into your edge, and the losses are temporary in the long term, so long as you have that edge. You must learn to separate the process from the outcome. This is very important. Let's talk about mistake tilt. And I think this is one that I've suffered from the most. Mistake tilt is the frustration you feel when reflecting on poor plays you've made in the past. You might say to yourself things like, it's going to take such a long time to make up for this mistake. It ruined my session. Maybe it just makes you feel like a failure. It makes you think you're not good enough. Maybe you put so much of your self-worth on your play skill that any mistake just sets you back. It's inexcusable to be making such obvious rookie mistakes at this point in my career. I've put the time in. I should have known better. And some reflection on your own play is absolutely healthy and even required to improve as a player. But putting too much of your self-worth on it is not good. To address mistake tilt, we need to realize that mastery is built on a mountain of mistakes. You cannot improve a perfect session. You need to make mistakes as a person to improve. The root cause of mistake tilt is unrealistic expectations, thinking that every cooler, crappy spot could have been avoided, when that's obviously not true. Expecting perfection from yourself and being too hard on yourself for not playing like a poker god all the time. You cannot attain perfection all the time, and you need to recognize that. And most importantly, mistake tilt comes from the inability to separate bad luck from bad play. You assign every bad spot other than the most obvious coolers to mistake, like a break-even call, and okay, they actually had it this time. Oh, I knew I should have folded. Like, well, maybe not, right? So again, to address mistake tilt, address unrealistic expectations, stop expecting perfection, and learn to separate the outcome from the process. Let's talk about entitlement tilt. So entitlement tilt occurs when you believe that your hand or range or skill level or whatever else entitles you to the pot. I deserve to win this pot. I deserve it because this board hits my range so well. Or I'm just so far above this donkey in skill level, I should just be winning this pot. I had aces pre-flop. I'm not folding to this fish. I don't care that the board ran out 5, 6, 7, 8 of spades. Like entitlement tilt it's when you believe something entitles you to the pot. And entitlement tilt is dangerous because the root cause of it, again, is overconfidence. But the problem isn't that you believe you're better than your opponents. It's not that you have a stronger range. That's fine. It's probably even true. The problem is that you believe this entitles you to the pot, leading to arrogance, overconfidence, riskier plays, and ultimately tilt. Now, being more skilled does not entitle you to the pot. Having a stronger range does not entitle you to the pot. You may not recognize your opponent's skill level or strategy. Maybe they're deviating to exploit you. So I think entitlement tilt often stems from the lies you tell yourself to protect your ego, whether that be about your skill level or even the range that you play in this spot versus your opponent. And while it's fine to push a range advantage, you need to realize that doesn't entitle you to win every single pot, right? So again, the problem isn't that you have a better range. It's not that you think that you're a better player. I mean, every poker player thinks this. It's that you believe this entitles you to win the hand, and that's simply not true. So let's talk about revenge tilt. Now, revenge tilt is when you're targeting another player. Something about poker can bring out your vengeful side. Even very well-mannered people can be brought to a very vengeful state by playing cards. It tends to be aimed at specific players. Maybe you feel that this player has targeted you somehow, or their players somehow disrespecting you. You feel like they're just 3-betting you every time you open. Maybe you think that they deserve payback for their fishy, unreasonable play. So you go out of your way to attack them. And this causes you to change your strategy and react sporadically. And ultimately, when you do this, you give up control. Revenge tilt. How do we address it? Now, remember, when you seek out revenge, when you alter your play, you surrender control. You're no longer playing your A game. You're playing a strategy designed to attack someone. There's a difference between a calm, logical exploit and angry, vengeful revenge tactics. It's a difference between, a calculated raise versus an inappropriate donk and just spewing, right? You need to check your ego. You need to stay in control. And most importantly, guys, you need to weaponize patience. Identify specific situations or players cause you to surrender control of your normal strategy. Resolve the flawed reasons and improve the technical mistakes that led you there in the first place. So what triggers this revenge tilt to come out? And again, we need to first identify, when is this happening? Well, it's causing me to surrender control of my standard strategy. It's causing me to completely change gears and go into some button-clicking spew fest to target this player who I think deserves it. When does that happen? What caused it to happen? Address that, and you will address revenge tilt. All right, so lastly, I'll talk about the most dangerous type of tilt, and this is desperation tilt. Now, desperation tilt is hard to recognize in the moment. This is the type of tilt that causes you to chase losses, overplay your bankroll, and take on way more risk than you should. And the reason desperation tilt is so much more dangerous than other types of tilt is that desperation tilt can destroy a bankroll rather than a session. Okay, guys? Desperation tilt is driven by the typical gambler's fallacy of gambling to break even by taking higher risks or gambling outside your role to try and get unstuck, to try and catch up. If you regularly experience symptoms of desperation tilt, buying in for way more than your role should allow, just taking on immense risk after you've had a bit of a downswing, even if it's just temporary, even if you just do it for a little bit and then, catch yourself and stop, this is a very, very dangerous form of tilt that is going to destroy your results. You need to take immediate and non-negotiable steps to mitigate revenge tilt. So first of all, you need to have a sense of urgency. You need to recognize this desperation tilt before it becomes full-blown. Maybe you buy in for too much, but it's not too late to stop that. But at a certain point, you're just all in, to the moon or to the ground and nothing in between. You need to set a strict stop loss combined with other prevention methods for maximum effectiveness. And you need to develop an emergency response. So when you realize this is happening, probably just the best thing to do is just shut down your session before it snowballs. Many coaches talk about, trying to play through tilt. And for an MTT player, for example, a desperation tilt might simply be just buying in for all of your role to one huge tournament. And at that point, it's too late. For cash players, it's more like just buying in for stakes way too high. But ultimately, when you sense it coming, you need to shut it down, and you need to shut it down fast, because this desperation tilt is the number one thing that can destroy a bankroll. I'm going to talk about other types of tilt that Tendler doesn't address in his book. So one is one that we all know, scared money. So scared money is a conscious decision to play defensively out of fear of losing money. And the easiest way to fix a scared money strategy is simply by using a proper bankroll. Now, if you don't know how to set up a proper bankroll, watch the variance and bankroll management video, or just Google it. There's tons of resources online. When you play scared money, you tend to play defensively, passively. You tend to overfold. You don't take on nearly enough risk in your technical strategy. And this is going to cause you to, for example, you'll only get the money in with the nuts or whatever. Scared money is not a strong strategy. It's very easy to beat. Then there's winner's tilt. Now, winner's tilt is more common than people realize. When you run extremely well, when you run like a god, you're more likely to take on tremendous amounts of risk and just overplay your hands everywhere. When you're just feeling like Icarus, just flying too close to the sun, that can also cause you to tilt, believe it or not. You just feel like you're unbeatable, and this will cause you to overplay everything. Now, there's also disassociation tilt, which is very common for people in the low stress state. It's a zombie-like autopilot state that just leads to random button clicking and eventually a complete lack of caution if you disassociate too much. So again, you need to be somewhat invested. You can't just be completely disassociated from the game. And then what I think is by far the most common type of tilt is distraction tilt, not giving your full attention to the game. And this is usually caused by multitasking. You're watching videos of social media while playing, maybe some YouTube videos, maybe you've got something else going on, chatting on Discord, not really paying attention to what's going on. And well, this doesn't seem that bad. What it does is it brings you out of the zone and into your B game immediately, because you can't play your A game while you're distracted. You need to be zoned in, right? And you can't be zoned in if you're watching YouTube videos while you're playing. Talk a little bit about the circle of control. This is a very useful thing that you can use to address tilts. And the circle of control is a theory that basically argues that there are three things in life. We have a circle of control. These are things we can control. We have a circle of influence. These are things that we can influence, and a circle of concern. These are things we care about, politics, weather, etc., that we don't have any influence or control over. Now, the theory is that you should focus more on things you can control and influence, and this will expand your circle of control. So you cannot control the deck, but you can control your strategy. You can't control your luck, but you can control how you react to your luck. And you cannot completely control your emotions, but you could take away the power that your emotions have on you. Again, I've mentioned this many times before, but humans remember losses more strongly than wins. This is like the foundation of the insurance industry, right? Risk aversion is just built into our mental framework, and it affects all of our decisions. Now, in poker, this often leads to placing too much mental energy on bad runs and just not recognizing good runs. So it's much easier to recognize bad variance than good variance, right? Remember, we are biased creatures, and it's very easy to recognize when you're running badly, not so easy to recognize when you're running well. Like I said, if I win, it's skill. If you win, it's luck. Like, you need to realize both sides of the variance coin. Before I move on to chapter 3, which will be a short chapter, I want to talk about gambling addiction. Now, this video will probably be watched by maybe 10,000 people, maybe more, and at least some of them will be struggling with this. The hard truth is that some players are not cut out to play poker professionally. Some people are just very susceptible to desperation tilt. Some people do not manage their money correctly. And some people, beyond all control, are just not cut out for this. And that's okay. That's completely normal. The problem is that it can lead to crippling and debilitating gambling addiction. The fact that you identify as an advantage player does not shield you from addiction, right? Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you can't become addicted to opioids. Just because you're an AA counselor doesn't mean that you can't be an alcoholic. And just because you identify as an advantage gambler does not shield you from gambling addiction. So if you or someone you love is coping with gambling addiction, please take these steps. Firstly, you can self-exclude from poker sites or casinos either temporarily or permanently. They are required by law to comply. That will prevent you from playing there. Call your local gambling addiction hotline and try this website, begambleaware.org, for further resources. Lastly, I want to talk about how to weaponize your mental game. And again, this is kind of a short section, but once you learn to recognize what causes tilt, you can also recognize when your opponents are on tilt and how to capitalize on it. And make no mistake, they're doing the same to you, right? So here's an example. Your opponent knits up after losing a big pot. You know them well. This always happens. They start playing very tight. They fear losing more money. Against this player, they're playing an exploitable scared money strategy. And they're a great target to run a big bluff against, as their fear may cause them to overfold. Aggression beats scared money. Just don't overdo it, right? Don't get too crazy. Another example, your opponent tries to win back their money immediately and will overplay underfold when tilted. So this player will continue to wide as they're chasing losses. Against this opponent, you should bet for thinner value and avoid bluffing, as they'll call too often and won't give your bluffs enough respect. If they're the type of player that's going to bet aggressively with the betting lead, don't call with static bluff catchers unless you tend to call it all the way down on the majority of runouts, because they're going to over aggress at you, and there's no point calling twice and then folding. If you feel that they're overexerting, call withdrawals, of course, but static bluff catchers that you plan to call fold aren't very profitable if they're going to bet. So against this opponent, bet for very thin value, remove bluffs from your betting lines, and remove static, that is a hand that can't improve, bluff catchers from your range. Another example is an opponent that has revenge tilt and will specifically over-aggress against you. Maybe you've 3-bet them one too many times, and this player will start just overreacting to any aggression from you specifically. And again, you just adjust the same way you would against any maniac. You remove bluffs from your aggressive lines and let them overplay into your value-heavy range, right? Let them just pile money into the pot when you have a good hand. Don't invest too much in static bluff catchers that you plan to fold after calling once. And, your implied odds go way up with draws. By recognizing the different types of tilt, you will be able to identify how to make money from other players that are on tilt. And you'll be able to identify how to prevent yourself from making these same mistakes. In summary, let's go over everything we've learned today. So first of all, establish a lifestyle routine and a training routine, and don't neglect your physical health. Things like simply staying hydrated, not completely destroying your sleep schedule, not eating bread every day for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. These are required for setting the foundations up for good mental health. I'm not saying you have to wake up at 5 a.m. and hit the gym every day. I'm just saying go to bed at a reasonable time, wake up at a reasonable time, even if it's unreasonable, as long as it's consistent. That's what matters in sleep quality. And try and get your physical health in check. Try and set a routine up. Similarly, you want to establish a training routine. You want regular, deliberate, intentional practice rather than just button clicking. When it comes to addressing tilt, I think the most important thing is to learn to separate the outcome from the process. That is to say, you need to separate the results of the hand from how you played the hand. Did you play it well? Did you play it profitably without knowing the results ahead of time? The answer is yes. Then great, you've made an investment into your edge, right? So separate how you played from the results of the hand. You need to identify different types of tilt and identify the emotional root cause of that tilt in order to address it. Being able to name the tilt is one thing, but then identifying the emotions that cause it is another. That requires a little more introspection. But once you can do that, you can inject logic and address it. I think one of the most important skills to dealing with tilt is just improving your ability to conceptualize variance. That is to say, you know what type of variance to expect. You know when you're experiencing good variance and bad variance. And you know just how swingy this game is. Like I've said, I've got that variance and bankroll management video if you want to learn how to use a poker variance calculator. There's tons of other videos and resources online. I think probably the easiest tool just to use a poker variance calculator, play around with that a little bit while, and you will get a much better feel for conceptualizing variance. Recognize your implicit biases, right? Recognize that we remember the bad more than the good. We remember the downswings more than the upswings. And lastly, weaponize your mental game. So protecting yourself from tilt is defensive, but then recognizing when others are on tilt and capitalizing on that is offensive. And if you do these things, your performance will be much less in the C game and much more in the A game, and your results will improve drastically. So there's a few resources that you guys can check out. Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2 by Jared Tendler. That's what this lecture is mostly based on. There's also Peak Poker Performance by Patricia Cardner. And I think Jonathan Little was also in that book. And just a quote by Edison: "Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work." Thank you, everyone, for coming to my session. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all got something out of it. I know I certainly learned a few things making this.